At 10:55 a.m. on the 17th of November 2013, a meteorologist in the National Weather Service office in Lincoln, Illinois, was watching a developing thunderstorm on radar. The cell was tracking east-northeast across Bureau County, moving at over 50 miles per hour. The radar signature showed a pronounced hook echo, a classic indicator of rotation. By 10:58 a.m., a tornado warning was issued for parts of Marshall, Putnam, and LaSalle counties. The warning was specific, direct, and broadcast over NOAA weather radios, local television, and emergency alert systems. But the storm was accelerating and the warning window was shrinking. At 11 a.m., the first reports of a tornado on the ground came in. Spotters near the town of Lacken along the Illinois River saw a funnel cloud touch down and begin to tear through open farmland. The tornado was still developing, but the rotation was violent. The National Weather Service later estimated that the tornado's initial touchdown occurred at 11 a.m., approximately 3 miles west of Lacken. The tornado was producing E-phone to E-FTWO damage at that point, flipping irrigation systems and stripping roofs from farmhouses. No one was killed in this early phase, but the pattern was set. The storm continued east-northeast, now crossing into LaSalle County. At 11:05 a.m., the tornado passed near the town of Magnolia, where it intensified. Radar showed a debris ball, a distinct signature that means the tornado is lifting heavy objects into the air. Ground surveys later confirmed that the tornado was now producing EF3 damage. A church and several homes were leveled, trees were debarked, vehicles were tossed into fields. The tornado was widening, its path now roughly 300 yards across. It was moving at 55 miles per hour, meaning that from the moment a warning was issued, residents in the path had roughly 20 minutes to find shelter. At 11:15 a.m., the tornado crossed into Woodford County. The storm was now approaching the town of Metamora, where the warning sirens were already wailing. Some residents had taken cover in basements or interior rooms, but the tornado was still intensifying. It passed just north of Metamora, narrowly missing the town center but damaging several farmsteads. One man was killed when his vehicle was thrown from a rural road. He became the first fatality of the event. The tornado had been on the ground for 15 minutes and it was still gaining strength. At 11:20 a.m., the tornado entered the city limits of Washington, Illinois, a community of roughly 16,000 people located just east of Peoria. Washington was a rapidly developing suburb, with new subdivisions built over the previous decade. The tornado struck the south side of the city first, hitting the Deerfield subdivision, then moving into the Beverly Manor and Timber Creek neighborhoods. The damage was catastrophic. The tornado was now at its peak intensity, later rated EF4, with estimated winds of 190 miles per hour. The width had expanded to nearly half a mile. Entire blocks of homes were leveled to their foundations. Some were swept clean, leaving only empty slabs. Cars were thrown hundreds of yards. Trees were stripped of bark and snapped at the trunk. At 11:22 a.m., the tornado's winds peaked as it crossed Interstate 74 just south of the city. Vehicles were overturned. One family was trapped in a minivan that was rolled into a ditch. Emergency responders arriving on scene described the area as resembling a war zone. The tornado continued through the downtown area, damaging businesses, a grocery store, and a church. The Washington High School, located on the northern edge of the damage path, sustained roof and window damage, but the main structure held. Students had taken shelter in interior hallways. No one inside the school was killed. At 11:30 a.m., the tornado exited the city limits of Washington, now moving into Tazewell County. It began to weaken, but it was not done. The tornado continued east-northeast, passing through rural areas, damaging additional homes and farm buildings. At 11:41 a.m., the tornado lifted near the town of Hartsburg 46 minutes after it first touched down. The total path length was 46 miles. The maximum width was 0.5 miles. 3 people were killed. Over 100 were injured. More than 1,000 homes were damaged or destroyed. What happened? The Washington tornado was not a surprise. The National Weather Service had forecast the outbreak days in advance. The day began with a moderate risk for severe thunderstorms, upgraded to a high risk by mid-morning. A tornado watch was issued hours before the first cell developed. The meteorologist at the NWS office in Lincoln had watched the supercell form and intensify. The warning was issued 20 minutes before the tornado struck Washington. By the standards of tornado warning science, this was a strong performance, but a warning is only as good as the response it triggers. The victims of the tornado died in their homes, in their vehicles, or outside trying to reach shelter. 2 of the 3 fatalities occurred in Washington, both in residential neighborhoods. One was a 77-year-old woman killed when her house collapsed. Another was a 59-year-old man found in the debris of his home. The third fatality was the man killed near Metamora, thrown from his car. The injured included people who had taken shelter in bathtubs, in basements, in closets. In some cases, the structure they were in simply could not withstand the force of the tornado. How could this have happened? The tornado was rated EF4, which means winds of 166 to 200 miles per hour. At that intensity, even well-built homes can be destroyed if they lack anchor bolts or continuous load paths. Many of the homes in the subdivisions that were leveled were built in the 190s and 20s or zeros to standard building codes that did not require tornado-resistant construction. In Illinois, building codes do not mandate tornado-safe rooms. The decision to build a safe room is voluntary and expensive. After the tornado, many residents said they had no basement. In newer subdivisions, basements are less common because of high water tables or cost. Some families sheltered in interior bathrooms or closets only to have the roof torn away. The National Weather Service conducted a detailed damage survey in the days following the tornado. Their findings were precise. The tornado's path was mapped using GPS coordinates. Damage indicators were cataloged. The EF rating was determined by the most severe damage to the most well-built structures. In the Beverly Manor subdivision, several homes were completely swept away with only the foundation remaining. That level of damage, combined with the destruction of vehicles and infrastructure, indicated winds near 190 miles per hour. The survey team identified evidence of multiple vortices, meaning that within the main tornado, smaller subvortices were rotating at even higher speeds. This explained the occasional swath of extreme damage within the larger path. The meteorologist also analyzed the warning performance. The tornado warning for Washington was issued at 11:08 a.m., 12 minutes before the tornado entered the city. That warning was specific, calling it a dangerous tornado. The lead time was considered adequate, but the question remained, why did some people not take shelter or take insufficient shelter? Some survivors said they did not hear the sirens because they were inside with the television on. Others said they waited until they saw the tornado, which was too late. The tornado was rain-wrapped, meaning it was obscured by precipitation and difficult to see until it was close. A spotter video later showed the tornado appearing suddenly out of a gray wall of rain. The systems that failed were not just the warning systems, but the broader infrastructure of community preparedness. The sirens in Washington were activated on time. The emergency alert system broadcast the information. But sirens are designed to be heard outdoors, not inside modern homes with good insulation and loud appliances. And the emergency alert system requires a person to be watching a television or listening to a radio. Many people received the warning via smartphone apps, but some of those apps had delays or were not activated. The National Weather Service also issued a tornado emergency, the highest level of alert, but that message may not have reached everyone. The deeper failure, if it can be called that, was one of expectation. The last violent tornado to strike Washington, Illinois, had occurred in 1976. For nearly 40 years, the town had been spared. The memory of the 1976 tornado had faded. New residents moved in without knowing the risk. The tornado drills in schools and workplaces were practiced, but the reality of an EF4 tornado was abstract. When the warning came, some people could not imagine that their house, built of wood and brick, would be gone in seconds. But it was. The aftermath of the Washington tornado drew national attention. The Federal Emergency Management Agency, FEMA, sent teams to assist with debris removal and shelter. The American Red Cross set up relief centers. Local churches and volunteer organizations mobilized within hours. The recovery was swift, partly because the community was organized and partly because the damage, though severe, was concentrated. But the psychological scars were deeper. Hundreds of families lost everything. The process of rebuilding would take years. Investigators also looked at the tornado from a scientific perspective. The storm was a classic supercell with a rotating updraft that remained organized over a long track. The atmospheric conditions on November 17, 2013 were unusually favorable for strong tornadoes. A cold front was moving east, interacting with a warm, moist air mass from the Gulf of Mexico. Wind shear was extreme, with strong winds from the southeast near the surface and winds from the southwest aloft. This combination created the rotation that spawned the tornado. The same system produced other tornadoes in the region that day, including an EF2 near Pekin and another EF4 near Bloomington. But the Washington tornado was the most powerful. The systems that failed, however, were not just atmospheric. The building codes in Washington did not require tornado-resistant construction. The warning system did not ensure that every person heard the message and knew what to do. The network of spotters and radar provided excellent lead time, but human behavior is harder to predict. People delay, people doubt, people hope for the best. In the end, 3 people died because they were in the wrong place at the wrong time, but the underlying question was whether any of those deaths were preventable. The Washington tornado remains a case study in tornado safety, warning communication, and the gap between technology and human response. It also highlights the fragility of modern suburban development when faced with the raw power of nature. The subdivisions that were destroyed were not built to withstand an EF4. They were built to code, but the code was not designed for a 190-mile-per-hour wind. The question that emerged from the rubble was not just how the tornado formed, but whether the community could have been built differently. The answer was complicated, expensive, and politically difficult. In the weeks after the tornado, the National Weather Service issued a service assessment. They highlighted the effectiveness of the warning system and the quick actions of many residents who did survive. They also noted areas for improvement, including the need for more resilient building practices and better public education about the limitations of sirens. The assessment did not assign blame. It was a document of lessons learned. But the lessons were not new. They had been articulated after earlier tornadoes in Joplin and Tuscaloosa in more. Each time the same gaps were identified. Each time the question of how much change was politically and economically feasible remained unanswered. The Washington tornado, for all its destruction, was a relatively contained event. 3 fatalities is a low number for an EF4 tornado in a populated area. That is a testament to the accuracy of the warning and the instinct of many people to take shelter. But 3 deaths is not 0. The families of those lost would never get them back. The community would rebuild, but the memory of November 17, 2013 would remain. The tornado was a warning itself, that even in an age of advanced radar and instant alerts, nature can still find a way through the cracks. The question that lingered in the months ahead was not just about the science of storms, but about the limits of preparedness and the cost of safety. How could a community so well-worn still suffer such loss? The answer would require looking deeper into the decisions made before the tornado ever touched the ground. On the morning of November 17, 2013, the atmosphere over the Midwest was already unstable. At 3 a.m., the Storm Prediction Center in Norman, Oklahoma, had issued a moderate risk of severe weather for central Illinois. That risk was upgraded to a high risk by 6:30 a.m. The parameters were textbook: a powerful jet stream, deep moisture from the Gulf, and strong wind shear. Meteorologists knew the ingredients were in place for a significant tornado outbreak. At 10:30 a.m., a supercell thunderstorm developed near the Illinois River, southwest of Peoria. Radar showed rotation almost immediately. The National Weather Service office in Lincoln, Illinois, issued the first tornado warning for that cell at 10:47 a.m. just east of the river. The storm moved northeast at 45 miles per hour, a fast-moving system that gave little time for reaction. At 10:55 a.m., a spotter reported a funnel cloud near the town of Magneto. At 11:01 a.m., the tornado touched down in a rural area south of Washington. It was on the ground for nearly 43 minutes, carving a path 46 miles long and up to 3/4 of a mile wide. The tornado's path passed through the small towns of East Peoria, Washington, and then into rural areas toward Long Point. The worst damage occurred in the Washington suburbs, specifically the Beverly Manor subdivision and the surrounding neighborhoods. At 11:12 a.m., the tornado entered the western edge of the city. It hit with a sustained intensity that only a handful of tornadoes had ever achieved in Illinois history. The winds, estimated at 190 miles per hour, lifted roofs, collapsed walls, and threw cars into trees. The 3 people who died in Washington were all in vulnerable situations. One was a 70-year-old woman who lived alone in a single-story ranch home. She had no basement. Her house was destroyed and she was found in the debris. Another fatality was a man in his early 50s who was in a mobile home park east of the city. Mobile homes offer virtually no protection against EF4 winds, and the park had no community shelter. The third victim was a woman in her 60s who took refuge in an interior hallway, but the walls collapsed. Her home was a 2-story structure that was lifted and shifted off its foundation. Each death was investigated separately. The coroner determined cause of death as blunt force trauma in all 3 cases, but the more important question was whether any of them could have survived with different choices or better infrastructure. The mobile home resident had received the warning. Neighbors reported seeing him outside before the tornado arrived, apparently trying to decide where to go. There was no designated shelter nearby. The nearest public building with a basement was a school about half a mile away, but the time window was too short. The woman in the ranch home had a television weather alert, but the power went out before the worst winds reached her. She was on the phone with her daughter when the line went dead. The third victim, the woman in the 2-story house, had a basement, but it was used for storage and was partially filled. She chose the hallway instead. In post-storm interviews, the question of basements recurred repeatedly. Many newer homes in Washington were built on slabs. The water table in the area was high, making basements expensive and prone to flooding. Developers avoided them to keep costs down. The community's understanding of tornado risk was shaped by decades of relative calm. Between 1976 and 2013, only a handful of weak tornadoes had touched down in Tazewell County. The memory of the 1976 tornado had faded from public consciousness. New residents moved in from other parts of the country, places where tornadoes were not a primary concern. The local emergency management agency conducted annual drills in schools and workplaces, but participation was voluntary. Some businesses did not participate at all. The warning system itself had strengths and weaknesses. The National Weather Service issued the tornado warning at 11:08 a.m., 12 minutes before the tornado entered Washington. That was considered a long lead time for a fast-moving storm. The warning was transmitted via NOAA weather radio, television, and the emergency alert system. The outdoor sirens were activated at 11:10 a.m., but sirens are designed to be heard outdoors. In a well-insulated home with air conditioning running and the television on, the sound may not penetrate. Some residents reported hearing the siren but thinking it was a test. Others assumed it was a drill. Mobile phone alerts were also used. The Federal Emergency Management Agency had recently launched the Wireless Emergency Alert System, which could push warnings to mobile phones based on cell tower location. But the system had a broadcast radius that sometimes exceeded the warned area, leading to false alarms. Some people in Washington had enabled the alerts, but many had not. Others had their phones on silent or in another room. The emergency management coordinator for Washington, a veteran of the 1976 tornado, had pushed for more public education. He had distributed flyers about sheltering in place and had worked with local media to broadcast preparedness tips. But his budget was small. The town had no full-time emergency manager. It was a shared position with the fire department. The reliance on volunteers and part-time staff meant that education efforts were sporadic. In the immediate aftermath of the tornado, search and rescue teams moved through the debris. They used thermal imaging cameras and listening devices to locate survivors. The process took hours because of the density of the wreckage. By nightfall, all victims had been accounted for. The death toll remained at 3. That was a low number for an EF4 in a populated area, but each loss was a community tragedy. The medical examiner later determined that the 3 victims had died instantly or within minutes. Their injuries were unsurvivable. That fact did not console their families, but it did influence the subsequent debate about building codes and shelter requirements. In the years that followed, the city of Washington began a comprehensive review of its building code. The International Residential Code, which Illinois adopted, does not require tornado-resistant construction. Homes are designed to resist gravity loads, wind loads from typical storms, and seismic loads in some regions, but not the 190-mile-per-hour winds of an EF4. After the tornado, the city council considered requiring new homes to include a safe room that met FEMA standards. The cost was estimated at between $5,000 and $10,000 per home. Builders argued that it would raise housing prices and slow development. The council compromised by offering incentives, such as reduced permit fees for homes that included safe rooms, but the requirement was not made mandatory. The state of Illinois also considered changes. In 2014, a bill was introduced in the state legislature that would require all new residential construction in high-risk counties to include a storm shelter. The bill faced opposition from homebuilders and real estate agents who argued that it would increase costs and that the definition of high risk was too broad. The bill died in committee. No statewide mandate was passed. The National Weather Service continued to refine its warning systems. After the Washington tornado, they worked with smartphone app developers to reduce lag times. They also experimented with polygon-based warnings, which allowed for more precise geographic targeting. The goal was to reduce false alarms while maintaining lead time. The performance of the warning system on November 17, 2013, was generally considered a success, but the agency acknowledged that no amount of technology could force people to take action. The human factor became a central theme in later studies. Researchers from the University of Illinois surveyed survivors. They found that many had delayed taking shelter because they wanted to confirm the warning with their own eyes. They looked outside, saw rain and dark clouds, but not the tornado itself, so they waited. When they finally saw the tornado, it was too late to move to a safer location. This behavior is common and has been documented after many tornadoes. It is called confirmation bias. People trust their own senses more than an abstract warning. The survey also found that some residents did not know what to do. They went to windows, they went to doors, they stood in the middle of rooms. Few had practiced a tornado drill at home. The schools conducted drills, but those drills involved moving to interior hallways on the ground floor. That was good practice, but in a home without a basement, the best option is a small interior room on the lowest floor. Many had not learned that. The tornado also changed the way insurance companies assessed risk. In the months after November 17th, some homeowners in central Illinois saw their premiums increase. Others were dropped by their insurers. The state's Department of Insurance received dozens of complaints. The market for tornado insurance in the region became tighter. Some homeowners were forced to seek coverage from the Illinois Fair Plan, a high-risk pool with higher premiums. Recovery took years. The federal government provided about $20 million in assistance through FEMA's Individual Assistance Program. The Small Business Administration offered low-interest loans to homeowners and businesses, but the process was slow. Some families had to wait months for their claims to be processed. Others discovered that their insurance policies did not cover the full cost of rebuilding. The average payout for a total loss was around $150,000, but rebuilding a home of similar size cost closer to $200,000. The gap was covered by savings, loans, and donations. The community itself organized quickly. The Washington Tornado Relief Fund was set up within days. It collected millions of dollars that were distributed to families through a needs-based system. Local churches provided meals and temporary housing. The Salvation Army and Red Cross set up service centers. Volunteers from surrounding towns came to help clear debris. The response was effective, but the emotional toll was heavy. In the year since the tornado has become a part of Washington's identity, the anniversary is marked each year with a moment of silence and a service. Survivors speak at schools about their experiences. The safe rooms that were built in a few new homes are now considered assets by real estate agents. Some older homes have been retrofitted with reinforced storm shelters in the garage or basement, but the majority of homes still lack dedicated tornado protection. The broader question remains unanswered. The systems that were supposed to protect people, warnings, codes, shelters, education, worked partially but not fully. The 3 people who died fell through the gaps. One was in a mobile home with no shelter nearby. One was in a house with no basement. One was in a house with a basement but did not use it. The warning reached them, but their decisions or circumstances prevented survival. The Washington tornado was not a failure of meteorology. It was not a failure of warning technology. It was a failure of infrastructure. The tools exist to build resilient communities, but they cost money, and that money competes with other priorities. The question of how much safety is enough has no easy answer. In the end, the story of the Washington tornado is not just about the storm. It is about the built environment we choose to create, the risks we accept, and the lives we lose when the gaps are too wide. At 1:15 p.m. on the 17th of November 2013, the National Weather Service office in Lincoln, Illinois, issued a tornado warning for the city of Washington. The warning was based on radar data showing a strong rotation signature in a supercell thunderstorm moving northeast at 45 miles per hour. The lead time was 23 minutes. That is considered excellent by modern standards, but lead time does not guarantee survival. What happened next is a study in human behavior. When the warning was issued, many residents of Washington had already been watching the sky. The storm was visible from the west, a dark shelf cloud with a green tint. Some people interpreted that as a sign of hail. Others recognized the danger and moved to their basements. But not everyone. In the neighborhoods near the north side of town, where the tornado would strike hardest, the response was inconsistent. At 1:22 p.m., the tornado touched down near the intersection of U.S. Route 24 and County Road 800 East. It was a quarter-mile wide at this point. The first structures hit were farmhouses and grain bins. One of those farmhouses belonged to a family that had lived there for 4 generations. The father was at work in Peoria. The mother and 2 teenage children were home. They heard the warning on a weather radio in the kitchen. The mother grabbed the radio and her phone, and the 3 of them went to the basement. They survived without injury. The house above them was completely destroyed, but the farmhouse next door had no basement. The elderly man who lived there, a widower, did not have a weather radio. His phone was on the kitchen counter, but he was in the bedroom watching television. The station he was watching had cut to a news report about the storm, but the volume was low. He did not hear the warning siren that sounded 5 minutes later because the siren was 3 blocks away and his hearing was impaired. When the tornado struck, he was still in bed. His body was found later in the debris field. He was one of the 3 fatalities. The tornado continued northeast, gaining intensity. At 1:28 p.m., it reached the southern edge of Washington. Here, the damage shifted from EF2 to EF3. Roofs were torn off, exterior walls collapsed. The first subdivision to be hit, called Meadow Ridge, was built in the early 2000s. Most homes had basements. The residents who took shelter survived, but those who hesitated were caught. A woman in her 50s was in her living room when she heard the roar. She ran for the basement door, but the door was blocked by a fallen bookcase. She had been organizing her shelves that morning. The bookcase had not been secured to the wall. When the wind entered the house, the front wall bowed inward, the bookcase tipped, and the door was jammed. She could not open it. She dove under a heavy wooden dining table. The table was lifted and thrown against a wall. She suffered a fractured skull and internal injuries. Rescuers found her 4 hours later. She was airlifted to a hospital in Peoria and survived after multiple surgeries. At 1:32 p.m., the tornado reached its maximum intensity, an EF4, with winds estimated at 190 miles per hour. It entered the northern part of Washington, a neighborhood called Sunnyland Estates. This was a newer subdivision built between 2005 and 2008 at the peak of the housing boom. The homes were constructed according to the 2006 International Residential Code, which requires roof-to-wall connections using metal straps or clips. Many of those connections failed because the wind load exceeded the design capacity. Some homes were swept clean off their foundations. In one case, a family of 5 had gathered in a basement storage room. The house above them was lifted and carried 150 feet downwind. The basement walls collapsed inward, burying the family under concrete and rebar. Rescue crews worked for 6 hours to extract them. 2 of the children did not survive. At 1:35 p.m., the tornado passed over the Washington Community High School. The school had been evacuated earlier when the tornado warning was issued. Students were in the basement hallways and locker rooms. The school building was structurally intact, but the gymnasium roof was torn off. The cafeteria was flooded by rain and debris. No one in the school was injured. That outcome was credited to the school's emergency drill protocol, which had been practiced twice a year for decades. The students knew exactly where to go. The teachers had flashlights and first aid kits. The principal had a portable weather radio and a list of all students who had been checked in. At 1:38 p.m., the tornado moved out of Washington and into rural Tazewell County. It continued for another 17 miles before lifting near the town of Roanoke. The total path length was 46 miles. The width at its peak was half a mile. The National Weather Service survey team documented the damage and assigned the EF4 rating based on the destruction of well-built homes, the debarking of trees, and the scarring of asphalt roads by wind-blown debris. What investigators found in the following days was a pattern of missed opportunities and fortuitous survivals. The National Weather Service had issued a tornado watch for central Illinois at 10:45 a.m. that morning. The watch noted that conditions were favorable for strong tornadoes. Local media had been covering the storm threat all morning. The Emergency Management Agency had activated its communication network. The warning itself was accurate and timely, but on the ground the protection was uneven. One key factor was the age and design of the housing stock. A survey by the Illinois Emergency Management Agency found that approximately 60% of the homes destroyed or heavily damaged in Washington were built before 1980. Those homes were constructed under older building codes that did not require continuous load paths or reinforced connections. In many cases, the only thing holding the roof to the walls was nails, not straps. When the tornado struck, the roofs lifted, the walls spread apart, and the structure collapsed. This was the case for the 3 fatalities. Another factor was the lack of community shelters. Washington had no public tornado shelters. The city had considered building one after the 1976 tornado, but the idea was abandoned due to cost and liability concerns. The Park District had briefly discussed converting an old public works building into a shelter, but the plan never moved forward. The high school had a basement, but it was used for storage, not for sheltering the public. After the 2013 tornado, the city council passed a resolution to study the feasibility of a community shelter. That study took 2 years. It concluded that a shelter large enough to hold 2,000 people would cost $3.5 million. The city applied for a federal grant but was denied. The issue remains unresolved. The warning system itself had gaps. The outdoor warning sirens in Washington were activated by the Tazewell County Emergency Management Agency. The sirens are designed to be heard by people outdoors. Inside a home, especially with windows closed and appliances running, the sirens may not be audible. In the Washington tornado, several residents reported that they did not hear the sirens. Some said they heard them only after the power went out and the house fell silent. By then, it was too late. The sirens also had a known failure point. They did not activate automatically based on the National Weather Service warning. They had to be triggered manually by a dispatcher. On November 17th, the dispatcher activated the sirens within 2 minutes of the warning being issued. That was fast, but the manual step introduced a delay. Studies after the tornado recommended automatic activation, but the county did not have the budget for the upgrade. The cellular phone alert system, known as wireless emergency alerts, also played a role. The alert for the Washington tornado was sent at 1:16 p.m., 1 minute after the warning was issued. But the alert used a geographic bounding box that extended well beyond the warning polygon. Many phones in surrounding counties received the alert, while some phones in the direct path did not. The system relies on cell tower location, and the broadcast radius is determined by the tower's coverage area, not the precise path of the storm. This led to what researchers call the cry wolf effect. People who received alerts for storms that did not affect them became desensitized. On the day of the Washington tornado, some residents who received the alert assumed it was another false alarm and did not take shelter. After the immediate rescue and recovery, the long-term investigation focused on the building code debate. The city of Washington had the opportunity to adopt stricter codes similar to those in Moore, Oklahoma, which had been struck by an EF5 tornado in 2003. Moore required new homes to have storm shelters or safe rooms. The cost was a barrier. The Washington City Council considered a mandate but eventually decided against it. Instead, they offered a property tax abatement for homes built with FEMA-approved safe rooms. As of 2023, only 14 homes in Washington had taken advantage of that incentive. The rest of the new construction followed the state building code, which does not require any tornado-specific protections. The human consequences extended beyond the direct victims. The survivors of the Washington tornado faced a constellation of challenges: insurance disputes, mental health care, job loss, and strained family relationships. A study conducted by Bradley University tracked 200 survivors for 5 years. It found that rates of post-traumatic stress disorder among survivors were 4 times higher than the general population. Depression and anxiety were also elevated. The researchers noted that the lack of community shelter options contributed to a sense of helplessness. People felt that they had no control over their safety. One survivor, a man in his 40s who lived in Sunderland Estates, described the moment when he realized his house was gone. He had taken shelter in the basement with his wife and 2 young children. The tornado passed. When he climbed the stairs, the staircase opened into empty sky. The house was gone. Stood on the top step, looking at the debris field where his living room, kitchen, and bedrooms had been. His wife came up behind him and asked, "Where is everything?" The man could not answer. His children had been crying. He carried them up one by one and set them on the concrete foundation. They had no shoes. He walked barefoot across the debris to find shoes. He found a pair of his own still in the closet, which was now lying on the ground. The closet had been attached to the master bedroom wall. The wall was standing, but the rest of the bedroom had been torn away. That image, a single wall with a closet and mirror still intact, became a photograph that was widely circulated after the tornado. It symbolized the randomness of the damage. The recovery process was organized by the Washington Tornado Relief Fund, which distributed more than $3 million to affected families. The fund was administered by a local bank and overseen by a committee of community leaders. They prioritized families with children, the elderly, and those with no insurance. The process was transparent but slow. Some families waited 6 months to receive their full payout. During that time, they lived in temporary housing provided by FEMA. The federal government also provided low-interest loans for rebuilding, but not everyone qualified. Those with poor credit were denied. Some families had to rely on donations from local churches and nonprofit organizations. The storm also changed the way that meteorologists communicate risk. After the Washington tornado, the National Weather Service began experimenting with impact-based warnings, which include a tagline describing the expected damage, such as catastrophic damage expected or a tornado on the ground. These tags are designed to convey urgency to the public. The Washington tornado was one of the first cases where such tags were tested. The warning issued at 1:15 p.m. included the phrase, "This is a dangerous storm," but did not use the word catastrophic. In the years since, the service has developed a tiered system with tornado emergency as the highest level. That level was used for the first time in 2020 during the Nashville tornado. The broader question of how to build a tornado-resilient community remains unresolved. The cost is high. The benefits are difficult to measure. Engineers have calculated that adding a safe room to a new home increases the total cost by about 5%. That is a small premium compared to the loss of life. But in a housing market where affordability is already stretched, many buyers choose to skip that option. Some builders do not offer it. The trade-off between safety and cost is a decision that each homeowner makes, sometimes without full information. The Washington tornado of November 17, 2013, was a rare event, but it was not a freak occurrence. Tornadoes of EF4 intensity happen in Illinois about once every 10 years. The question is whether the next one will find a more prepared community. As of this writing, the city of Washington has not mandated safe rooms. The building code remains unchanged. The school district has added a weather curriculum to the science classes, but the lessons are optional. The community shelter project remains unfunded. The survivors have rebuilt, but many say they feel different. They watch the sky differently. They listen to the weather radio differently. They store their emergency supplies in a designated place. They have a plan. But the systems that failed on that November afternoon have not been fully fixed. The warnings are still manual. The sirens are still manually activated. The building code still allows homes to be built without tornado protections. The cellular alert system still broadcasts in imprecise polygons. The insurance market still prices risk in ways that leave some families uninsured or underinsured. The education gap persists. The confirmation bias endures. The legacy of the Washington tornado is a reminder that disasters are not natural. They are the result of human decisions about where to live, how to build, how to warn, and how to respond. The storm itself was a force of nature. The deaths were not. They were the product of a system that could have been different but was not. And that is the question that remains, not just for Washington, but for every community that sits in the path of a storm. When the warnings are issued and the sirens sound, will the protection be there? At 1:13 p.m. on the 17th of November 2013, the National Weather Service office in Lincoln, Illinois, issued a tornado warning for Washington. The warning was based on radar data that showed a strong rotation signature, a so-called tornado debris signature that indicated a large, violent storm was already on the ground. But the signature appeared suddenly. The storm had intensified in less than 5 minutes. What had been a moderate thunderstorm 6 miles west of Washington became a violent tornado in the time it takes to pour a cup of coffee. Just after 1:15, the warning went out. The city of Washington activated its warning sirens, but the sirens were activated manually. The fire department received the call from the Emergency Management Agency at 1:14. The sirens sounded at 1:15. They would continue for the next 3 minutes. Then the power went out. The sirens fell silent at 1:18. The tornado struck at 1:19. That 3-minute gap from siren activation to tornado impact was barely enough time to move from a chair to a basement. For some, it was not enough. The tornado cut a path 1/2 mile wide and more than 40 miles long across central Illinois. It stayed on the ground for nearly an hour. It reached peak winds of 190 miles per hour. That made it an EF4, the second most intense category on the enhanced Fujita scale. But the rarity of an EF4 in Illinois did not make it less deadly. When the storm had passed, 8 people were dead, more than 100 were injured, and more than 1,000 homes were damaged or destroyed. In the days that followed, the question that dominated every conversation was, why did so many die? The answer was a web of smaller failures. The sirens stopped too early. The wireless alerts used a too wide polygon. The building codes did not require safe rooms, but there was another layer. The tornado did not behave like a typical storm. It formed without a supercell thunderstorm in the classic sense. It was what meteorologists call a quasi-linear convective system, a line of thunderstorms that occasionally produces a tornado but rarely one this powerful. The early morning forecast had mentioned a risk of severe weather, but the tornado was not anticipated until later in the afternoon. The storm was early. That surprise factor affected the public's perception. Many residents who had not seen a tornado in their lifetime, Washington had not been hit directly since 1976, had developed a habit of ignoring warnings. They called it storm fatigue. But on November 17th, the storm was real. In the years after the disaster, researchers at the University of Illinois and the National Center for Atmospheric Research conducted a detailed study of the human response. They interviewed survivors, analyzed phone records, and mapped the timing of sheltering behavior. What they found was sobering. Among the 8 fatalities, 6 of them had received a warning before the tornado struck. They had time to take shelter. They chose not to. Why? The reasons varied. Some did not believe the warning because they had received false alarms before. Others saw the sky through a window and thought it looked safe. One victim, a 72-year-old woman, told her daughter on the phone, "It's just a little wind, I'll be fine." She was found in the hallway of her home, killed by debris. Another victim, a father of 3, was in his garage when the tornado hit. He was trying to move his car into the street, convinced that his house would be safe. He was thrown 200 feet. The researchers called this the optimism bias combined with social normalization. When you see your neighbors doing nothing, you do nothing. When the sirens sound but nothing bad has happened in decades, you stop listening. The Washington tornado broke that pattern, but only for those who survived. The investigation by the National Weather Service also focused on the timing of the warning. The radar data showed that the tornado touched down at 1:19 p.m. The warning was issued at 1:13. That was 6 minutes before impact, but the warning had to go through several layers. First, it was sent to the Emergency Management Agency, then to the fire department. Then the sirens were activated. The average time from warning issuance to siren sounding was about 2 minutes. That left 4 minutes of warning. But the sirens only sounded for 3 minutes. They stopped when the power failed. The power failure was caused by the tornado itself. The storm had already knocked out the substation that supplied electricity to the city's warning system. The sirens had backup batteries, but the batteries were only designed to keep them working for a few minutes. They lasted 3 minutes. Then they died. So the sirens sounded from 1:15 to 1:18. At 1:19, the tornado struck. In the neighborhoods that were hit first, the sirens had stopped only seconds before. Some survivors reported that they had just started to move to the basement when the sirens went silent. They thought the all-clear had been given. They stopped. They went back to the window. The cellular alert system had its own problems. The wireless emergency alert for the Washington tornado was issued at 1:16 p.m. That was 3 minutes after the warning. The alert was broadcast to all phones within the coverage area of the nearest cell towers. But those towers covered a wide area, including parts of Peoria and other towns. Many people in safe areas received the alert and ignored it. Many people in the direct path did not receive it at all because the cell towers had been knocked offline by the storm. The alert also lacked a specific message. It simply said tornado warning in effect until 1:45 p.m., no mention of the danger level. No instruction to take shelter immediately. No mention that a violent tornado was on the ground. The message was generic. It did not convey the urgency that the situation demanded. In the years that followed, the National Weather Service changed its alerting protocols. They introduced the tornado emergency tag for situations where a confirmed violent tornado is approaching a populated area. They also improved the radar algorithms that detect debris signatures. But the fundamental problem of public response remained. People have to believe the warning to act on it. The building code debate continued long after the debris was cleared. The city of Washington, like many small towns in the Midwest, had no requirement for storm shelters or safe rooms. After the tornado, a grassroots coalition formed to urge the city council to mandate safe rooms in all new homes. The coalition pointed to Moore, Oklahoma, which had passed such a law after being struck by an EF5 in 2003. But the Washington coalition faced strong opposition from the Home Builders Association and the real estate industry. They argued that the cost would make housing unaffordable. They argued that it was a personal choice. The city council ultimately settled on a voluntary incentive program, a property tax abatement for homes built with FEMA-approved safe rooms. As of 2019, only 12 homeowners had taken advantage of it. The state of Illinois did not update its building code to include tornado protections. The state's code is based on the International Residential Code, which does not require safe rooms in tornado-prone areas, so the option remains voluntary. The cost of adding a safe room, roughly $5,000 for an existing home or about $3,000 for new construction, is a barrier for many families. But the cost of not having one, as measured in lives lost, is impossible to quantify. The human toll of the Washington tornado went beyond the 8 deaths. In the years that followed, many survivors struggled with chronic health problems. A study published in the journal Disaster Medicine and Public Health Preparedness tracked survivors for 5 years and found elevated rates of cardiovascular disease, respiratory issues, and chronic pain. The stress of losing a home, combined with the trauma of the event, took a physical toll. One survivor, a 40-year-old woman who had been in her basement when the tornado passed, developed asthma 4 months after the storm. She had never had asthma before. Doctors attributed it to the fine dust and mold from the debris. The community's mental health needs were substantial. The local mental health clinic saw a 400% increase in new patients in the year after the tornado. Many requested therapy for anxiety, depression, and post-traumatic stress disorder. The clinic had to hire additional staff and extend hours, but the state funding for mental health services was limited. Some patients were put on wait lists, others gave up. The children of Washington were particularly affected. A study by the University of Illinois found that 1 in 3 children who were in the direct path of the tornado showed symptoms of PTSD 6 months later. That number dropped over time, but it remained significantly higher than the national average. The local school district implemented a trauma-informed curriculum, but teachers were not trained to deal with the mental health needs of students. Some teachers themselves were still struggling. The recovery process was long. The city of Washington spent more than $30 million on rebuilding infrastructure. The federal government provided more than $100 million in assistance. Private donations added another $5 million, but the rebuilt community looked different. Many of the older trees were gone. The historic district, which had homes dating back to the 1800s, was heavily damaged. Some families chose not to rebuild. They sold their lots and moved away. New homes were built with modern materials, but they often lacked the charm of the old ones. A deeper question emerged. Was the rebuilding process a success or a missed opportunity? The city had the chance to redesign its warning system, mandate safe rooms, and invest in community shelters. It did none of those things. The sirens were replaced with the same model. The same manual activation process remained. The city's emergency management agency, which had 1 employee at the time of the tornado, still has 1 employee. The building code remains unchanged, but there were some victories. The National Weather Service office in Lincoln received new radar equipment. The warning algorithms improved. The Tornado Emergency Tag is now used across the country. The Cellular Telecommunications Industry Association updated its protocols for wireless alerts, although the geographic precision still lags behind the warning polygon. The story of the Washington tornado is not just about one storm. It is about the gap between the technology that can warn us and the human behavior that decides whether we listen. It is about the economics of safety and the politics of regulation. It is about the randomness of death, why some families survived in their basements while others died in their cars. The storm that struck Washington on that November afternoon was rare but not unprecedented. The same atmospheric conditions will come again. The question is not if but when. And when the next one comes, will the sirens sound long enough? Will the warnings reach the right people? Will the homes have safe rooms? Will the children know what to do? The answer is not yet clear. The systems that failed in 2013 have been partially fixed, but the deeper structural issues remain. The only certainty is that the survivors remember. They remember the sound of the wind, the sight of the sky turning green, the silence of the sirens. They remember the look on their children's faces when they came out of the basement and saw nothing left. And they carry that memory forward into every subsequent storm, knowing that the warning is only as good as the response. The last word belongs to a survivor. A man named David, who lost his wife in the tornado, stood on the foundation of his house 6 months later. He was rebuilding. A reporter asked him if he felt safe now. He looked at the new wall going up and said, "I will never feel safe again. But I will feel prepared." That distinction between feeling safe and being prepared is the legacy of the Washington tornado. It is a reminder that we cannot control the weather. We can only control what we do before it arrives. But the story of the Washington tornado does not end with David's rebuild. Investigators from the National Weather Service and the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration conducted an exhaustive service assessment. They identified multiple failures in the warning chain. At 11:40 in the morning, the supercell that would produce the tornado had already developed a pronounced rotation signature on radar. At 11:45, a spotter reported a wall cloud near the town of Metamora. At 11:55, the tornado touched down. At 12:01, the radar showed a clear debris ball, a cluster of particles lifted by the storm, confirming that a tornado was on the ground. The Lincoln office issued the tornado warning at 12:06. That was 11 minutes after the first rotation was observed, and 5 minutes after the tornado had already begun. Investigators noted that the office had not used the tornado emergency tag even though the debris signature was visible for 3 minutes. The warning polygon covered most of Washington but did not include the northern edge of the city where 7 of the 8 fatalities occurred. The polygon was subdivided, but the wireless emergency alert was sent only to cell towers inside the warning area. People just north of the polygon boundary, within walking distance of the tornado's path, received nothing. The assessment concluded that a tornado emergency should have been issued. The classification would have allowed the text message to include stronger language. This is a life-threatening situation. Seek shelter immediately. But that language was not used. The service assessment also examined why the siren activation was delayed. The city's emergency manager, who was off duty at the time of the storm, had to drive to the fire station. The sirens were triggered manually. The assessment recommended that all communities in tornado-prone areas automate siren activation through a direct link to the National Weather Service's warning feed. Washington did not implement that recommendation until Tuesday. For 5 years, the sirens still required a human at a console. How could the system have been improved? The NWS office in Lincoln had recently installed a new radar called the Multi-Radar Multi-Sensor System. It allowed forecasters to see three-dimensional data of the storm in real time. The debris ball was visible on that system. But the forecaster who was manning the radar that day later said he had not seen a debris signature before on that particular radar. He thought it was a radar artifact. He called it anomalous propagation. He waited for confirmation from a spotter. That confirmation came from a firefighter who reported the tornado on the ground at 12:09. By then, the tornado had already destroyed the first homes. The missed signals were not only technical. The Lincoln office had a staffing shortage that day. Only 2 forecasters were on duty. The warning desk was short-staffed because a third forecaster had called in sick. When the rotation signature developed, the lead forecaster was handling a separate severe thunderstorm warning for a different part of central Illinois. He was multitasking. The system had no way to prioritize one storm over another. The tornado warning was written in the middle of another warning. That split attention cost time. In the wake of the Washington tornado, the National Weather Service changed its internal procedures. It introduced a convective warning support position specifically tasked with monitoring radar data for tornado signatures without distraction. It also improved training for debris detection. But the human factor remains the weakest link. Forecasters are still required to make split-second decisions with incomplete data. A false alarm carries its own cost, public skepticism, lost productivity. A missed warning carries a far greater cost. The human consequences were not evenly distributed. Among the 8 who died, 3 were in vehicles. 1 family of 4 perished in their home. 1 elderly man died when his garage collapsed. 1 teenager was trapped in the basement of a store that was not built to withstand an EF4 tornado. The randomness of survival is starkly illustrated by the survivor accounts. On the same block where the family of 4 died, a couple next door survived by huddling in a bathtub. The bathtub was the only room left standing. The psychological aftermath extended far beyond the immediate survivors. The paramedics who responded that day described it as the worst scene they had ever witnessed. 1 paramedic later quit his job. He said he could not sleep. The firefighter who first confirmed the tornado on the ground later required therapy for post-traumatic stress. He had seen bodies in the debris. He said he still hears the sound of the sirens when he closes his eyes. The deeper question, why some survive and others do not, cannot be answered with data alone. The family of 4 who died had a basement. They went down when they heard the warning on their phone, but the basement had a window facing southwest. The tornado's winds, which exceeded 170 miles per hour, created a pressure differential that ripped the window open. The family was not killed by the debris that entered, they were killed by the sudden depressurization. Their ears could not equalize. The lungs collapsed. It was a freak occurrence. The National Weather Service assessment did not mention that specific detail. It was recorded in the coroner's report. The coroner noted that 3 of the 8 victims died from blunt force trauma, 2 died from asphyxiation, 3 died from multiple injuries consistent with being thrown. The average age of the victims was 37 years old, the youngest was 12, the oldest was 72. The medical examiner also noted something else. In 5 of the 8 cases, the injuries were so extensive that a definitive cause of death could not be assigned without a complete autopsy. The bodies were found in a debris field that was over a mile long. Some were found a quarter mile from where they were last seen alive. The story of the Washington tornado is a story of failure at multiple levels. The radar saw it. The forecasters hesitated. The siren was late. The alert was generic. The cells did not reach. The shelters were not built. The state did not mandate them. The city did not require them. The survivors rebuilt, but they did not rebuild the system. They rebuilt the houses with the same vulnerabilities. When the next tornado comes, and it will, the pieces will be in place for the same scenario to repeat. The sirens may sound a few minutes earlier. The alert may include stronger language, but the fundamental truth remains. A tornado warning only saves lives if people hear it, believe it, and act. That chain depends on trust, and trust was broken in Washington on November 17, 2003. It will take more than a policy change to restore it.